Now, the refi boom has started not because rates have crashed down, right? Because it really hasn't. It's dropped, but it hasn't dropped by the amount that a refi boom would start with. But just because of the trigger and the movement of the action of, hey, everyone, get off your butts and start actually looking at the market to tapping into your equity.
Well, folks, we got another thing right. The refi boom is in full effect. Refinances went up 35% week on week, 117% year on year. But is a refinance right for you or a second mortgage? We have a lot of folks that should be doing the math, calculating what's called a blended interest rates. It is possible to buy down a refi into the fives, but what is a buy down? We will talk about that. And we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the NAR settlement that goes into effect in about 48 hours and will 48 hours and undoubtedly impact the real estate market, especially on the buyer side. Lots of things changing. Jonathan, how you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Last week, maybe even 2 weeks ago, I put out a notion that the refi boom would just explode. Curious, what are you seeing in your contacts with clients? Is it true? Is refis off the cliff?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of talked about it, I think, last week, where we were like, hey, the rates don't need to move that much, and not a lot of things need to happen to tip the scale over. But we were talking about, we think the refi boom has started just because it's a trigger of movement, so that even with the increase in rates last week and then obviously a little dip this week and then now today starting to be a little bit higher today, it's like we're all kind of in again. I think a new rectangle's been created, right? And maybe the
Slightly
top has come
lower.
down. Yeah,
Yeah.
the top has come down from 4.5 to like maybe 4.2, and then now the bottom that went down like 3.7, 3.6, right?
Mhm.
So we're still in that. Now it's a new rectangle, right? But with the market shift, obviously last week we were talking about the fact that it didn't need to take a lot for the refi to happen. It just had to have the starting motion of it. So now people are in the motion of it. They're already mostly in process. They started the process maybe 2 weeks ago when the first dip happened. And now they're kind of writing it through the process now. And more people are like, okay, well, now I need to jump in. And so they have a little bit of FOMO, so they're jumping in. So now the refi boom has started not because rates have crashed down, right? Because it really hasn't. It's dropped, but it hasn't dropped by the amount that a refi boom would start with. But just because of the trigger and the movement of the action of, hey, everyone, get off your butts and start actually looking at the market to tapping into your equity.
Yeah, that's exactly why I think a refi boom was coming and not a purchase boom. And I was very clear about this. And again, so far we're right. Purchases are up like 1% or something like that, but refis are up, double and triple digits depending on the month or year. And that is because again, we have record amounts of equity in housing, record amounts. Like I don't know it's like crazy amount, never higher. And I think when we had rates go down, it just caused people to look at what they're currently sitting on. And again, when I look at the refi boom, and I don't know if you have this data, but I'm going to ask anyway. You can do, in my opinion, two types of refis. You can do the standard rate and term. Hey, I just want to do this because I'm going to lower my monthly expenses. The other one is, hey, I want to do a cash out refi and take some of this money, maybe pay down credit cards, maybe to save for a rainy day, maybe to invest in a business, maybe to put in a backyard, maybe pay for, whatever. I'm curious, in the data that you've seen in the last couple of weeks, can you give me a rough guesstimate, rate in term versus cash out refi? What's the split roughly?
I'd probably say 60%, 40%. 60% for refi for cash out, 40% for rate and term. And the
Oh,
reason,
wow. Okay.
yeah, the reason why is because a lot of people that refi or that bought in the last year, right? They bought in the sevens, high sevens, potentially in the eights. If they're able to get it down low enough and have a big enough savings on the monthly payment, I've been telling a lot of clients like, hey, you can reinvest that, right?
Yeah.
And if you're cash flowing happily at where you are right now,
Yeah.
you can lower the effective interest rate, right, on the loan, pay the loan off faster, but still get the benefits of writing off whatever the 6 point whatever
Mhm.
percent, right? So
Yeah.
that only works for bigger loans, right? So that's kind of what I'm talking about for bigger loans. People that usually have a little more liquidity, right?
Mhm.
But for a lot of smaller loans under 250,000 that are more, hey, I need cash to kind of tap into to buy this, buy that. People with a little less liquidity overall, they are the ones cashing out more than the other ones, right? And a lot of our clients, obviously we're in California, a lot of our clients are higher net worth sometimes, right, in terms of a bucket range. So they are the ones kind of keeping the cash in, while, you know, kind of the people that are starting out in investing started in the last 2 years are really trying to tap into their equity to be able to reinvest into
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah, I got to tell people. I mean, I wrote about it in my book, One Rental at a Time. For the first decade, maybe even 12 years of our career, I was very much in the cash out refi, reinvest. Let me be very clear. I never used a single penny of a refi for a trip, a car, anything. It was always to go buy that next asset. Also, people should be very clear. The first time I did a cash out refi, I was an idiot, moron, and stupid. I turned a great positive cash flow asset into a negative cash flow asset, hence what I call alligators. Don't do that. Do the math. Work with a professional. Don't turn a good asset into a liability. It's so stupid, and I still feel dumb for doing that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I have a lot of people reaching out being like, I need to get 80%. I need to get 85%. And I tell them like, hey, I'm sure there's someone that's going to do it, right?
Yeah,
And if someone's going to do it, great. But I can't in good conscience tell you that 80%, 85% is going to help you more than just keeping 5% in, like 75% or even 70%, because what's like a lot of these people are within the, you know, 200 to $300,000 or maybe below in terms of loan
mhm,
amount, and 5% guys is 15,000 or 10,000. It's like, is that really going to make a difference? Because you're
mhm.
going to get worse terms at 80%. You're
Yep.
going to sacrifice your cash flow. You might even lose cash flow, right? Because
Yes.
all we're looking at when we're looking at DSCR is PITI versus rents, versus if your actual real life, you know, expenses include property management, include vacancy reserves, include utilities, all that. So are you really like getting the utility out of the $10,000, $15,000? Is it really worth it to go through that? Or, you know, I always suggest just leave a little bit of a margin. Five
Yeah.
percent is not that much money. You're not going to lose sleep over it. Just leave a little bit of a margin just
Yeah.
for yourself.
I love this is why Convoy is on my channel and stays on my channel, because you're willing to tell people no, or at least strongly advise. At the end of the day, it's always the clients. They can always do what
Mm-hmm.
they want. But the fact that you have the balls and the heart to have that conversation, that's why Convoy comes back every week. So I appreciate that conversation. The other thing we need to talk about is something called a blended interest rate. A blended interest rate, especially for investors, is a very interesting calculus today. So a blended interest rate, folks, you can think about this. Today you have a mortgage. Let's just pretend it's 4%. You got this back in 2022 when rates are low. You bought your fourplex. You got 4% 30-year money. Your fourplex now has doubled. It's gone from 250 grand to 500 grand. You're sitting on $300,000 in equity. And oh, by the way, you are very much still in growth mode. You want to take a part of that $300,000 in equity and reinvest it in maybe another fourplex, for example. So, as that investor, who I was for over a decade, you have two choices. So, Jonathan, today I could come to you and perhaps get a second, which I've done a quick research, probably is 11 or 12%. I could easily get 100 grand, which would take me from 200 to 300. I'd be at 60% LTV, not a problem. Or I could do a cash out refi. I could pay 3 points, which we'll talk about what a point is, and again, go up to 60 or 70% LTV. And my rate on that new package won't be 12%. It won't be 4%, but it'll be some blended interest rate. And people need to start doing that math because a blended interest rate is important to understand. What say you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of the conversations I've been having with a lot of clients because they're so focused on the rate itself, right? On their first, they're like they to their death will not want to lose like 4% or 5%, right? And I'm like, okay, well, let me break it down for you because if you have a 4% first in your example and an 11% second, and they're roughly not that much different in size, your blended rate on that will probably end up being somewhere in the sevens, right?
Oh, I mean, yeah, you could just do the math, right? It'd be seven
Yeah,
and a half, assuming the same
exactly.
number. Yep.
So if you're in that scenario, right, and you don't even need to, we'll talk about the buy down in a little bit, but you don't even need to buy it down to, let's say, the 5.5 rate, right? You can keep it at whatever the starting rate is. If it's 60% today, I think the starting rate was like 6.2 6.3 or something like that, 6.1, whatever that is, right? If it's somewhere with a six handle, like on the low six handle, and your blended rate is a 7.5 or 7.3 or 7.5, whatever it is, then you're looking obviously at a better differential going a full-on cash out refinance
Yep.
instead of doing an actual second loan. Because if you do a second loan, like, yes, you might feel good that the first rate looks like a 4 and has a 4 handle and you can brag to all your friends, but your payment's going to suck because you have a fat
Yeah.
second with a payment that's higher. So instead of doing that, keep some equity in, but also if you're going to cash out refi, you can keep doing that, right? And keep it with a blended rate, an actual rate that's lower, and will
Mhm.
keep your payment actually lower than doing a 4 plus an 11.
Yep.
Instead of that, do a 5.5, or don't buy it down and keep it at 6.5 or below, right? And at
Yeah.
that point, then you're actually going to get all your money out with a lower payment.
Yeah. So, folks, at the end of the day, the blended interest rate is a math formula. It is something you could absolutely research. I've posted it in my communities many times. But at the end of the day, and not a lot of us want to do it, but that's why you reach out to Convoy. You have these conversations. A good rule of thumb is if, like in my example of a fourplex, you're going to extract roughly the amount of cash that you have in the second versus the first, your blended interest rate is going to be higher than a just a cash out refi. Now, in another example, if your first is 200 grand and your second is 20 grand, there's a very good chance that the blended interest rate will be lower because again, it's not only rate, it's also the amount of debt that's impacted by that rate. So it is a math formula. It is semi-calcul or complicated. When in doubt, I just reach out to Convoy Home Loans and tell them my scenario. So if somebody wanted to do that right now, how would they do that, Jonathan?
Go to convoyhomeloans.com and let us know you came from ORaaT.
So let's keep going because again,
Yeah.
something we talked about last week, I got some questions on. I think we need to go deeper on. You talked about potentially buying down a DSCR loan into the fives. I believe
Mm-hmm.
you talked about it costing 3 points. I don't think a lot of the average, kind of casual consumers really understand. All they heard me say was 5.5 or 5.9. So let's be a little clearer and talk about the process. Maybe give an example of how to get something a 30-year DSCR sub six. Let's do some math.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, right now, buying it down means you're buying it down from a starting rate without buying points, right? So you
So
have
in your vocabulary, that's
uh,
called par.
correct par, right? Just like golf, if you hit par, you hit exactly the number of strokes that's allowed for that
Yeah.
hole,
It
right?
doesn't it doesn't cost you a penny. It's par. Yep.
Exactly. So that's par, right? And then below that is what we call buy downs, right? And you can bring that rate down from this point to this point. So in our example, the first rate, the starting rate, let's say, is 6.375, right? That's the starting rate without buying it down. Now, if you paid 3 points, which is what is real today, you can buy it down to probably 5.65, right? So is it for everyone? No, right? But it is for and this is what I want to emphasize. It's for the people that want to set it, forget it, not have to worry about it again, because refinancing costs money. So
Yes, it
essentially,
does.
the way that you can think about it is you are investing the future refis into one refi where you know that no matter what the market does, you're going to be happy with the return. You know the return, rents are going to continue to go up while your payment stays the same, pretty much, right? So that's why you would do it, right? But if you're doing, let's say, from a 6.3 to a 5.6 in this example, and it's a $200,000 loan amount, right? So at a $200,000 loan amount, 1 point is 1% of the loan amount. So if you wanted to get it from 6.3 to 5.6 in this example, and it costs 3 points, then we're talking about 200,000 times 3%, which
Mhm.
means it's going to cost $6,000 to get
So
it
they'll
down.
they'll see a line item on the closing statement calling
That
for six
says
grand. Yep.
points, 6 grand, this to this, right? So 6.3 to 5.6. With the $6,000 though, and how I like to do the math is what's the payment difference between 6.3 and 5.6 in terms of your time horizon of how long you want to hold a loan,
Yep.
on whether it'll be worth it, how long it'll be take to break that even. Because at the end of the day, right, if you're refinancing, you're technically not, most times if you did it right and you have equity, you're not bringing money out of pocket to pay those points.
Correct.
So it's wrapped into the loan, right? So people like to bring closing costs and put it right smack dab up front and say, this is what I'm paying now. But I like to explain it's not necessarily what you're paying now if you look at it from an actual mathematical sense. That
Mhm.
$6,000 is financed over the 30-year period.
Mhm.
So in reality, what's $6,000 divided by 360 months is $16 a month, right? So that's how it's technically financed over the 30-year term, right? So you're not paying it up front. But the reason you do this is you want to make sure that I'm going to pay off the loan with this, right? I'm going
Right.
to accelerate the payments or
It,
do whatever.
it works great if you really get to set it and forget it, right?
Exactly.
Where this becomes a problem is if rates crash to, I don't know, call it 4%, and you're forced to do another refi. Because I don't know if this is what you mortgage guys call this, but this is what I talk to normal people about. A point, in my opinion, is like prepaid interest.
Mm-hmm.
You're basically giving the lender, some of their, interest income up front, and thus they're taking it out. Because again, the average loan is only held for 8 years historically. Now, given the low interest rates of this generation, maybe that extends, but that's why banks are willing to say, hey, I'll give you 5.6 instead of 6.3 if you give me 6 grand, because frankly, they're betting you're going to, be out of the loan eventually.
Yeah. And again, the payment difference and kind of like it's a little bit more of a mathematical breakdown on effective interest rate and such. But even if rates, let's say, drop into the fours, right? You're only mad about it dropping to the fours if your effective interest rate is higher than that still,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's
Of course.
something we can maybe expand on in a different video. But essentially, if you're talking about $6,000 to buy it down, and let's say the payment difference is $300 a month, right?
Okay.
Then the math that I do is $6,000 divided by 300 a month, which is 20 months,
Yep.
right? Divide that by 12 months, and that's 1.67 years,
Yep.
right? So
I
that's
like
the
it.
recuperation period to recuperate the cost
Mhm.
of $6,000. And I say cost in air quotes because it's only a cost till it's realized, right?
Mhm.
But it's costing 1.67 to get your rate down. You're saving $300 a month, and
Yeah.
you can
So if you're going
reinvest
to
that
be in
300.
that loan, let's put it in. So if you're going to be in this loan, in this example, for greater than 2 years, you win.
Yep.
That's what that math says.
Yep, exactly. So that's, I think, an important thing for clients and borrowers to understand because that's
This
how
this is
these
why
things affect.
this is why they got to come to Convoy. You're willing to have these conversations. It's not. I. They might be fun for you, but I'm guessing they're not fun. But they're so important. That's why you're willing to do them. That's why you treat one rental at a time different. You have a drop down list on your website because you and Dustin will take care of us. I appreciate you. The audience appreciates you. Folks, you got to reach out to Convoy. Just tell him your story. He'll do the math. He'll walk through it. Buying it down in the fives may or may not make sense, but at least you're going to know.
Yeah.
Jonathan, one more time, where do they go?
Go to convoyhomeloans.com and let us know you came from ORaaT.
So let's hit one more thing, like we talked about in the beginning. We have this NAR settlement going into effect, I think, in 2 days. I think it's on the 17th,
Mm-hmm.
might be the 19th. Either way, buying a home, frankly, selling a home, but definitely buying a home is going to change forever. I think there's a lot of confusion, a lot of nervousness. As a lender, I'm curious, what kind of impact or noise are you hearing?
So obviously, a lot of realtors that are buyer focused, right? A lot of them are going to have to change their strategy, but now they are required to have the buyer pay for their commission, right? Um, the sellers are working it in two ways. There's some of them are, doing side agreements to do it, increasing the purchase price to fit in some seller concessions, kind of fitting it all in there. But the difficult part is this actually hurts buyers more than anything else before, right? And this is also why we've also said, like, if you like a property, if you want to buy, like, now is the time to buy, when we were talking about it like maybe a month or 2 months ago, because there wasn't this issue, right?
Yeah.
So this is but if now basically what it is let's say it was a 4% or 5% or 6% total commission paid. The MLS does no longer states
Nope.
what the commission's going to be. So the agent, your buyer's agent, has to reach out to the seller's agent and say, hey, like, what are we willing to work out here? Right. And if they're not willing to work something out, then the buyer's agent has to come to you and say, hey, I'm sorry, like, you're going to have to pay me. Right.
Yeah.
The
I don't
way
work for
this,
free.
yeah, exactly. And the way that this works is and I think agents are worth it like majority of the time, right? Having a buyer's agent, right? Because no normal person has enough time to negotiate every detail. But um, if you have, let's say, a 2% commission, right, and the seller's like, we'll go ahead and wrap that into the transaction, raise the price by let's say 2% to give you a 2% seller concession in there. Typically, up until this point, that seller concession has been used to either help buy down the rate, it's been helped to pay for loan closing costs, escrow, impounds, title fees, all that. Now that we're going to see more of that 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever it ends up being, be used to pay the buyer's agent, right?
Yeah.
Which actually makes it now 2%, 3%, 4%, whatever it ends up being, more expensive
Yep.
for the buyer.
Yeah, this is going to get messy. And the other thing that I've tried to get people to realize is this settlement was enacted or released in perhaps the hottest sellers market I've ever seen. I believe we've entered a buyer's market, and this buyer's market's going to get worse. So it's really funny or bad timing that this is coming out exactly when buyer's agents are going to be more important than ever. So folks, buckle up. It's going to get messy. One more time, Jonathan, if somebody wanted to reach out, how do they do that?
Go to convoyhomeloans.com and let us know you came from ORaaT. Or if you're an
Thank you, bud.
agent listening, right?
Yeah,
Just real quick, if you're an agent listening, reach out to kind of see how we can help, finance this or work this for your clients as well, so you can be better.
absolutely. Agents, do me a favor.
Okay.
Reach out to Jonathan and or Dustin. Tell them you came from One Rental at a Time. They will take care of you. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.